Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of On the Rise. Today, we're joined by Shubh Malde, the founder and CEO of Arda, a venture-backed enterprise startup that enables transportation companies to easily use drones to make deliveries. Arda is launching in West Africa, starting with a pilot program to service 10 health centers with a catchment size of 250,000 people for last-mile deliveries. Hi, Shubh. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Very good to be with you, Vishal.
So starting off, what was the inspiration behind your startup?
Yeah, so we very much, my co-founder, Jan, and I fell into the startup world very spontaneously, very organically. I don't think either of us intended to sort of see ourselves here in what was now a couple of years ago. But basically it started as many startups these days did during COVID, and both firsthand seeing the challenges of last mile logistics. We were both living in Europe at the time, and so that was particularly vivid for us. Stock management between pharmacies, areas of surplus and deficit, the challenges of moving things on the last mile. It's going to be the quickest and shortest leg of the supply chain, but is often the most money draining and the most intensive. And so we saw that really vividly. I think COVID brought that to life, at least the management of COVID brought that to life. Jan, my co-founder, has been sort of building drones and flying drones for 8 years. I've sort of had experience setting up previous social enterprises in Africa, run a lot of projects in and around the continent with NGOs and government as well. So those were sort of our backgrounds, and Jan sort of had the idea, why don't we try drone delivery? Something that had been done before, and big companies like Zipline, Supero had already been operating in Africa. But nevertheless, we were sort of on the brink of graduating from high school, and we thought, right, this is something pretty fun to do. And so the summer after graduating high school, we both went out to the Gambia in West Africa, which the story goes further than that. I'm sure we'll come on to that. And we basically ran a 2-week project with the Gambian Red Cross Society there. Why Gambia? It's a place that I'd sort of been acquainted with before. It's got really stark healthcare challenges, so we could have a really big impact there. And it was a sort of really friendly operating environment where we had key stakeholders and key partners who were really willing to bear the flag for us, so to say. And so we ran that project, and sort of one thing led to another, and eventually found ourselves sitting across from the Minister of Health, and in meeting with him, and that's sort of where the modern Arda vision was born out of. And we sort of went away back to the US for university, and had to think, right, we've launched this drone delivery idea in Africa in a really basic way, and here's this bigger industry out there. How can we really tap into it in the most successful way? It was an industry at the time that was sort of stagnating and needed a new innovation, a new take. At least that's what we thought. And so that's where sort of the modern Arda vision of a software approach to drone delivery was born.
And what motivated you to leave the University of Chicago and pursue Arda full time?
Yeah, so in all honesty, it was a very practical decision. It wasn't some enlightenment that said, right, university isn't for me, and embark on a world of startup founding. It was a very practical decision. So after Jan and I sort of had to think about what's going to be the right approach to this, what's the right product, what's the right train of thought to solve this problem around drone delivery. We got our ideas on paper and started in small ways to build out a prototype with some of our friends from university, and basically got in front of investors, got in front of VCs, and started pitching. Initially, we actually looked to get grant funding from Africa, but that seemed to be a really long process. So that's eventually how we fell into the VC and tech startup world, and we started pitching to VCs with part of Harvard Innovations Lab, and that's where things started really happening in terms of traction. And so we raised a pre-seed last summer, and from there it was a practical decision, right? Arda was taking up more and more of our time. We now had investors as well as a product and potential customers that we had responsibilities towards, and we thought, right, we want you into university. We're not sort of really far down the tunnel that we can't turn back. So, and US universities are really generous in terms of giving people the flexibility to do their own thing. So we thought, right, this time may not come around again. Let's really go for it. We're young and we're excited by this and really passionate about the project. So let's go for it.
And were there any personal or professional challenges you faced during making that transition?
Yeah, for sure. sort of at the time I left, I was 19, now 20, but you know, but for many people, and certainly at that point in my life, university was sort of the grounds for my social life. I had a lot of really close friends, still have a lot of really close friends at U Chicago, and when university years are sort of really treasured times in terms of their ability. You spend time with your peers, and you're very free in a sense, and so transitioning, you miss a lot of that, right? You transition to the real world, and I absolutely love what I do and wouldn't switch it for anything else. But that sudden change into spending your whole day sort of often by yourself, and often sort of Jan and I are just talking to each other a lot, and sometimes not many other people. And so those changes were difficult. But generally speaking, university doesn't have to be, and it isn't an answer for a lot of people. I think a lot of people think it is. And a lot of people see it as an end goal. It's fantastic, can be fantastic, can be a really useful tool. But there isn't a substitute for getting real world experience. And oftentimes, for a certain person, university can be quite restrained. There can be a certain herd mentality that's really easy to get carried away with. And so, it's really important, sort of more general advice here, but it's really important to play it by ear. And yeah, as I said, real world experience trumps everything.
And touching on that last point, what is your advice for young leaders looking to go into college next year, myself included?
Yeah. So, the big thing, I think, one thing that it all comes down to is you have to have the fortitude and courage to be independent and an independent thinker. Whether it's in class, whether it's in your social life, it's very, very, as I just said, it's very easy to get carried away by herd mentalities, by a type of group think that arguably is becoming more and more present. But sort of going to university, university is meant to be a place where you really dedicate yourself towards the things that you're interested in, finding out your interests, finding out things about your interests, and that's what university is meant to be for. So go in there, really pursue whatever it is that excites you, your curiosities. But that's the thing, stay curious. Being able to be an independent and free thinker is one of the biggest strengths you can have, and especially carrying that into the startup and founder world, and the tech space, especially in terms of innovation, in terms of being a trailblazer and industry leader, in terms of disrupting the industries. Those are some of the most useful skills you can have, and treated well. Even if your long-term goal is to be a startup founder, the way you approach university can be sort of a really brilliant foundation to that, and any type of education for that matter.
Yeah. And congrats on how well Arda has been doing. You have two pilot contracts in the Gambia. They'll be launching operations in the next few weeks, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit more about the process for prepping and organizing the launch? I imagine it's been quite a daunting task.
Yeah. So in fact, straight after leaving U Chicago last summer, I pretty much went straight to the Gambia for, I think, what would have been 3 to 4 months. Looking back, it seems an age away now, but there were 3 or 4 fantastic months on the ground, meeting with our key partners, our key stakeholders, and regulatory bodies involved every day. Sort of really trying to build an excitement and some traction, some headwind behind this idea, and this what was a very new idea to Gambia at the time. It's yeah, as you said, it can be a daunting task, right? Especially being someone young, not necessarily the world of experience going into it, and all of a sudden those 4 months were filled with sitting in government committees, sitting across from ministers and big government bodies and some really big key stakeholders, and you're trying to sell this thing that not many people have seen before, certainly in the Gambia. The Gambia hasn't had a drone delivery project set up before. And so the key thing for us, and for me especially, was, can we identify the key people who are really going to be flag bearers for us? Can we find those champions for Arda in the country, in the environment, and really build off those people? And in the Gambia, we're very fortunate to have some incredible partners and some incredible individuals who I am very close with, and we work really closely together as a company. And that's sort of been the roots of our triumphs in the Gambia and in our beginnings especially. But yeah, I'm happy to go into it further as well. But of course, from a regulatory point of view, again, that's a big challenge, and so you have to navigate that. There's all of the different things that come into it, but ultimately, the people aspect is a really important thing for success.
And have you faced any other challenges, like geographical challenges or infrastructure challenges with organizing your pilot program, and how have you gone about tackling those?
Yeah, I mean, so you have the obvious challenges of trying to coordinate a project in West Africa when I after those 4 months, I was then back between the US and the UK. Again, juggling other parts of running the business and raising a seed round and all of that stuff. And so that can be challenging, especially sort of, in Africa, that's a particular challenge. You really have to be on the ground for things to move quickly. Otherwise, the geography and the infrastructure were things those were the problems that we were trying to solve. And so, it was really important for me, and I, from prior experience in the Gambia and elsewhere in Africa as well, it's really important to have a really good knowledge of the market and place where you're operating, and how do you navigate the environment. That was incredibly important. From a regulatory point of view, and this isn't just for Gambia, this is the whole of Africa and expand it to the whole of the world. Regulators can often be very, very restrained when considering new innovation, and so you really have to make a case in point for, right, here's a wealth of benefits. There's all these different ideas, not only Arda, but whatever it might be, waiting to enter the market. How can we work together to really maximize the benefit for the broader population, while of course maintaining a trust and a responsibility as well.
And touching on that last point, have there been any challenges in addressing the regulatory requirements and safety concerns surrounding drone deliveries, particularly in the context of operating in West Africa and other emerging markets?
Yeah, and so on a broader scale, the regulations on paper are very, very similar and almost identical between West Africa, wider Africa, and the US, and even Europe. Very, very similar operating environment. To the point that we often make to investors is, as we transition, not transition, but add the US to our operating scope, as well as Africa, from an operating point of view and from a business point of view, we won't actually have to change anything. We'll just be making the same points and maybe slightly nuanced points to a different regulatory body. But again, I mean, it comes down to that thing about, right, can we really incentivize regulators to be liberal with regulation? And I think, again, a broader point here, but that's something that I'm very passionate about. Sort of, right, how can we free up, especially in Africa, in the African context, how can we free up the economies and really let people build wealth for themselves? And there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in that part of the world, and how can we unleash that for maximum benefit, and remove a lot of the red tape? A lot of the red tape is a big challenge in Africa, and a lot of people will attest to that. And so, a general case to be made to governments and regulators about that. How can we work together to really unleash the potential here?
And what have been some of the biggest challenges in developing and scaling your platform, and how have you been able to overcome them?
Yeah, so I mean, developing a product in the space that we are in, software with some sort of attachment hardware, in though we try to be hardware agnostic as much as possible. We have to deal with it in the day-to-day. It's incredibly challenging, and given Jan's experience and my market knowledge, even that sort of, going through the operating procedure for the first time, as sort of first, second time founders. And so you have to, you learn a lot of things along the way. You make mistakes, and, Lord knows that we've sort of drained thousands of dollars of mistakes, and That's bound to happen. That's bound to happen. Any founder will know that. The key thing is, how do you respond to that? How do you really get organized about your workflow process? And that's the thing. Nothing can beat organization, planning, structure, processes within a company. How can you minimize the risk of what you're doing? There's a purview of what you can control. How can you really control that and get to grips with that? And that will let you, that will give you the best platform to then, go out and innovate on the edges of your products and give you sort of a core stable structure, which you can always come back to.
And as we talked about earlier, these past few quarters have been a tough fundraising climate. In spite of this, you successfully raised your pre-seed last summer and are currently in the process of raising your seed round. How has been your fundraising experience so far? And have you faced any challenges in securing funding?
Yeah, so no doubt that this time round for our seed round has certainly been tougher than our pre-seed because of the environment, and people will tell you that across all spaces. But I think the fundamentals stay the same. The fundamentals really stay the same. There's been some sort of transition where some of the pie in the sky ideas aren't getting funding anymore, and one would argue that they maybe never should have. But if you have some sort of tangible product in the real world, then it all comes back to the same things, right? For an early stage startup, what are you selling to an investor? And those have been the really key points for us. The team is the first thing. And second thing is the way you think, the way you approach problem solving. And so those have been the two really big things for us. We operate on a B2B, in a B2B way. And it's been a sort of slower go-to-market process for us, given the space that we're in compared to a lot of different startups who are raising right now. And so it's really key to convey to investors, right? We've got this really exciting traction here. And this is our thinking about our growth strategy, right? This is how we're going to go from A to B to C, and eventually to this big vision that we see at the end. And so, yeah, for me, it really breaks down to two simple things: team and the way you think and the way you approach problem solving.
And speaking of the bigger picture, drone technology, as well as the incorporation of computer vision and machine learning, have grown tremendously over the past several years. How do you see drone deliveries transforming the logistics landscape?
Yeah. So, look, Jan and I both very strongly believe that drone delivery will be inevitable. Sort of 10 years from now, it seems inevitable that the way we'll transport goods and the way we'll make deliveries for the last mile in large part will be drone delivery. So it's really a point of, right, which solution is going to unlock that in a way that really accesses the commercial mass market. And that's the thing. There's a book by, I think, a writer called Carlota Perez. She talks about sort of the stages of technology working its way into a market by going from eruption and sort of initial outbursts into the market to deployment, which is when sort of the mass populace sees it in their everyday. And there's a turning point in between that. And I think that's really where drone delivery is at the moment. You sort of had your early movers, and you had your Amazon who tried to give it a go and sort of fell flat on their face, and Zipline and Supera who have really been sort of key early movers and really pushing innovation, Wingcopter. But now you're sort of at a transitional point where it's like, right, okay, this technology is pretty much proven. What's going to be the model? What's going to be the operating procedure that really takes it from a novelty and an exclusive novelty of that to the commercial mass market? How is this going to be usable by your regular delivery operator who just wants the benefits of drone delivery but doesn't want the big investments and the big complexities that often come into it at the moment? And so that's what we're really trying to plug into. But certainly, I think drone delivery will be inevitable within the next 5 to 10 years. It's about what model really unlocks that future, though.
Yeah. And where do you see Arda going in 5 to 10 years? Your co-founder mentioned in an interview that you have a commercial partnership for expansion in 2023. Can you share any details on that?
Yeah, so that commercial partnership is also in Africa with sort of multinational medical lab network. It also has units in East Africa and in the UK. And so we're really going to look to build upon that have a really good relationship with that partner in West Africa at the moment as well. I think the broader vision for Arda is firstly get a really strong stakeholder in Africa. Time and time again, that's proven to be the really big market for drone delivery companies up front. Not only is that the best way you can then access US commercial drone delivery permissions and FAA regulations by already having experience of what's called Part 135 operations. But the opportunity for drone delivery in Africa is massive. The incentives are the biggest. The customers are the most willing to go to market really quickly and push this technology. But then, the broad vision is, so at the moment we're focusing on healthcare. Broad vision we to expand to all use cases. We're use case agnostic. Drone delivery is just like a car. You can put anything in a car boot or a car trunk. You can put anything in a drone payload. So, eventually we'll want to move across to food delivery and e-commerce and parcel delivery, as well as healthcare and pharmacy delivery. And so, the limits are really broad, really broad. And we'll really hope to sort of provide a foundation and an infrastructure that really powers the drone delivery industry and makes it accessible, as I said, to the mass market. That's really the goal of Arda.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes. And congrats on everything you've accomplished. To close out this interview, one final question. What advice would you give to young founders looking to start their own companies?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think for me, it breaks down into three things. One of them is an absolute non-negotiable. So I'll start with that. There's no excuse, and there's nothing that beats hard work and dedication. If you work hard and you're dedicated and sort of not working hard on useless things, you're bound to be successful. So that's the first really big thing. The other two things are things that I've touched upon before, and that's putting people first, especially as a young early stage founder, not only in sort of your attitude to customers and finding people who are really going to be the flag bearers for your technology or innovation, whatever it is, but in being able to listen. People are going to fall head over heels to give you advice and support you on your journey if you position yourself as someone who's really willing to listen, really willing to be open and to be a free thinker, and take that seriously. So that's the first thing. Be a really good listener and put people first. The second thing is, again, touched on it before, but be an independent thinker. Maintain your voice. Get clear about what you think and talk to people. Figure out what you think and really always pursue your curiosity. That's a really, really important thing, and that will maintain your ability to disrupt and to innovate where others may not be able to. So that's a really vital skill.
That's really great advice. And thank you so much, Shubh, for taking the time to talk to us today.
Lovely. It's great talking, Vishal.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Stay tuned for my next episode and see you all soon. Bye.